I never liked remembering my childhood. People usually talk about theirs with soft smiles and nostalgia, but mine feels like a film burned at the edges, warped, discolored, and full of things I wish I could unsee. When I close my eyes, I still hear the house breathing. Not creaking, not settling, breathing, like something alive beneath the wood, something waiting for me to notice. We lived in a house on the outskirts of Hollow Creek, a dying town that barely appeared on maps. My father was a construction worker, my mother, a nurse. Money was thin, and the house, an old structure with cracked foundations and faded green paint, was cheap enough that my parents didn't question why it had been abandoned for years. They said it just needed life again. I was 8 years old when we moved in. I didn't know that life was exactly what the house had been missing, and it would take ours to have it back. The first night was ordinary enough. The movers left early, saying the road back to the city turned misty at sunset. I remember my mother laughing that off, saying it was just superstition. Hollow Creek had plenty of that. Whispers about miners who went missing underground, about the forest swallowing people whole, but we were too new, too naive to believe any of it. The only thing that struck me that night was the silence. Not peace, not quiet, silence. The kind that presses against your ears until you hear your own heartbeat. The crickets didn't chirp. Even the wind seemed to stop when it reached our property line, like it was afraid to enter. My room was upstairs, facing the woods. The wallpaper peeled like dry skin, and there was a faint smell, not exactly, but something stale, like earth that hadn't been turned for a long time. I remember touching the floorboards and feeling them pulse slightly, as though something underneath was moving. When I told my mother, she smiled and said, "Old houses have their own rhythm." I believed her. That night, I woke to tapping, soft, steady tapping from inside the wall behind my bed. Tap, tap, tap. I called for my father, and he checked, hammer in hand, but found nothing. "Probably pipes," he muttered, though the house had no active plumbing upstairs. I tried to sleep again, but the tapping resumed, faster, impatient. Then, a whisper. It wasn't words, more like someone breathing my name without sound. I remember pulling the blanket over my head and waiting for morning. When sunlight finally came, I thought I'd imagined it. But when I glanced at the wall, I saw faint scratches where the sound had been, 3 uneven lines etched deep into the wood. I didn't tell anyone after that. Over the next few weeks, things grew stranger. My mother started sleepwalking. I'd wake up to find her standing at the edge of the woods, still in her nightgown, staring into the trees. My father would guide her back gently, whispering her name, but she never remembered it in the morning. She began to keep a journal around that time. I didn't know it existed until years later, when I found it hidden in the basement, pages filled with sketches of faces she claimed she saw on the walls. The smell worsened too. My father blamed the crawl space under the house, saying something might have died there. But when he went to check, he came back pale and shaking. I remember him scrubbing his hands raw at the sink, muttering, "It's not an animal, it's not." He never told us what he'd seen. At school, I stopped talking to other kids. I couldn't explain why I always felt watched. Even in daylight, shadows seemed thicker inside our house. Sometimes when I walked past the basement door, I'd hear faint humming from below. The tune was childish, almost like a lullaby, but wrong in some way, dissonant. Then came the night I saw the boy. It was raining, thunder rolled over the valley, and the power had gone out. My parents were asleep. I was playing with a flashlight, tracing the beam across my room, when it caught on something in the corner. A figure, small, crouched, with its head tilted toward me. At first, I thought it was my reflection in the mirror, but I didn't have a mirror there. Then it moved, slowly rising to its feet. It looked like a boy around my age, but his skin was gray, stretched too tight, and his eyes were hollow pits. He opened his mouth, and I heard a sound like wood splintering. He raised a finger and pointed at the floor. I dropped the flashlight. The beam flickered wildly before dying, plunging everything into black. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I just ran to my parents' room and hid between them until morning. When my father checked my room the next day, the only thing out of place was the floorboard where the boy had pointed. It was slightly raised. He pried it up and found something wrapped in cloth. Inside was a child's shoe, mud-caked, small, and bone-white fragments still clinging to it. That was when my parents started fighting more. My mother insisted we move and said she couldn't sleep with that thing under the floor. My father refused, claiming we couldn't afford to leave. He buried the shoe somewhere behind the house. The next day, the smell was gone, but the tapping returned, louder than ever. Weeks blurred together. My mother's journal is filled with more drawings, the same boy always standing by my window. She began whispering prayers at night in languages I didn't recognize. I remember waking once to find her drawing symbols on my forehead with something cold. To keep him out, she said, but it didn't work. One night, I woke to hear my father shouting. The air in the house felt heavy, thick with static. I crept down the hallway, and that's when I saw it. The front door was open, and my father was outside, screaming into the woods. He held the shovel he'd used to bury the shoe. The ground was dug up, the hole empty. And then, from the trees, something crawled out. It wasn't the boy anymore. It was taller, wrong, its limbs too long, its face stretched into something that looked like a mask made of wet paper. It stood there silently while my father trembled, shovel raised. Then it whispered something I'll never forget, a voice that sounded like all of us speaking at once. He never left. The lights flickered inside the house, and the sound of tapping erupted from every wall. My mother screamed. My father swung the shovel, but it passed through the figure like smoke. The last thing I remember that night is being pulled backward by something cold, unseen, into the hallway. The floor splintered beneath me and I fell. When I woke up, it was morning. The house was quiet. My father was gone. My mother said he'd gone to find help, but she wouldn't meet my eyes when she said it. We never saw him again. We moved out months later. My mother got sick soon after. Doctors said it was exhaustion, but I knew better. She died when I was 12. I was sent to live with an aunt in the city, far from Hollow Creek. For years, I pretended it never happened. I told myself it was childhood imagination, trauma, grief. But sometimes when I lie in bed at night, I still hear the faint sound of tapping inside the walls. And when I close my eyes, I see that boy pointing down, reminding me that something I buried long ago is still waiting to be found.